My name is Jason Miller, and I lived in Redwood Hills Hostel during my second year college in Ohio, a place students joked about being cursed long before I learned why no one laughed after midnight. The hostel was an old brick building built in the 1950s for floors tall, narrow hallways, flickering tube lights, and a constant smell of damp wood and bleach that never fully went away, no matter how often the staff cleaned. Winters there were brutal, the kind where snow buried sidewalks overnight and silence pressed against the windows so hard it felt physical, and that silence was the first thing that felt wrong. On my very first night, while unpacking around 1:40 a.m., I heard footsteps pacing slowly outside my room, bare feet, not shoes, moving back and forth, stopping directly in front of my door for several seconds before continuing down the hallway. I assumed it was another student, maybe drunk or sleepwalking, until I opened the door and saw the hallway completely empty, lights buzzing softly, security camera at the end blinking red like it was watching me specifically. My roommate, Evan Parker, laughed when I told him, saying everyone hears stuff their first week, but even he went quiet when I mentioned the footsteps didn't make any sound except when they stopped. Over the next few nights, strange rules began to surface through whispers and warnings passed between students. Never open your door after 2:30 a.m., never answer knocks without checking the peephole, and if you hear someone crying in the bathroom stalls late at night, you leave immediately and don't look under the doors. The third night, I broke one of those rules. I was studying late when I heard soft knocking, slow and polite, coming from our door, followed by a woman's voice asking for help, saying she was locked out and freezing. Through the peephole, I saw nothing but darkness, as if the hallway lights had gone out on our floor alone. Evan grabbed my arm and whispered not to open it, his face pale, eyes fixed on the door, and that's when the knocking changed, harder, angrier, no longer pretending to be human, followed by the sound of fingernails dragging downward across the wood until they stopped right at the base of the door, lingering there for almost a full minute before disappearing into silence. By the second week, sleep became impossible. Every night at exactly 2:17 a.m., the hostel seemed to wake up, toilets flushing on empty floors, lockers slamming shut, and something heavy being dragged slowly across the ceiling above the fourth floor, even though that level had been sealed for years after a student died there under unexplained circumstances. One night, curiosity overpowered fear, and Evan and I followed the noise upstairs, ignoring the dread pooling in my stomach with every step. The stairwell lights flickered as we climbed, and the air grew noticeably colder, our breath fogging even though the heating was still running below. When we reached the locked door to the fourth floor, we found it standing wide open, hinges creaking softly as if someone had just passed through, and beyond it stretched a hallway darker than it should have been, walls stained with something black and uneven, doors slightly open like mouths waiting to speak. From the far end, we heard whispering, dozens of voices overlapping, repeating names neither of us recognized, punctuated by sudden sharp laughter that echoed unnaturally close. As we stepped inside, the door behind us slammed shut on its own, the sound echoing like a gunshot, and the whispers stopped instantly, replaced by the sound of bare feet running toward us from the darkness ahead. That was the moment I realized Redwood Hills Hostel wasn't haunted by one thing. It was feeding on everyone who stayed too long, and it already knew our names. We didn't run at first, not because we were brave, but because fear locked our bodies in place as the sound of bare feet sprinting toward us grew louder, closer, echoing unnaturally off the narrow fourth-floor hallway. Evan grabbed my sleeve and yanked me backward just as a shape burst out of the darkness ahead, stopping inches from us. It wasn't solid, not completely. Under the flickering emergency light, it looked like a human outline stretched wrong, arms too long, legs bending at angles that made my stomach churn, its face hidden behind a curtain of dark, wet hair that twitched as if something underneath was breathing. The thing tilted its head slowly, and from beneath that hair came a whisper that wasn't a whisper at all, but dozens of voices layered together, softly repeating Evan's name again and again. We ran then, stumbling back toward the stairwell as the hallway lights shut off one by one behind us, plunging everything into darkness except for the red exit sign glowing like a warning soaked in blood. The door at the end slammed open just as we reached it, and we tumbled down the stairs, not stopping until we were back on our floor, gasping, shaking, convinced we had imagined the entire thing, until we noticed the scratches. Long, deep marks had been carved into Evan's arm through his jacket, fingers clearly outlined, ice cold to the touch, as if something had held onto him longer than either of us realized. Neither of us slept that night. Instead, we sat with the lights on, listening as the hostel returned to its false normalcy, broken only by distant footsteps pacing the hallway above us, pacing back and forth like something waiting for morning. The next day, the hostel felt different, heavier. Students moved quietly, avoiding eye contact, and a rumor spread by afternoon that Emily Carter, a freshman from the third floor, hadn't shown up for classes or answered her phone since the night before. By evening, her name was printed on a missing person flyer taped near the elevator, but no one acted surprised, and that terrified me more than anything else. That night, Evan refused to stay in the room, claiming the walls were whispering, so I went to the communal bathroom alone around 2 a.m., breaking another unspoken rule. The moment I stepped inside, the lights flickered violently before settling into a dim, buzzing glow, and that's when I heard it. Soft crying coming from the last stall, quiet and rhythmic like someone trying not to be heard. I froze, every warning I'd been given screaming in my head, but the crying turned into a weak plea for help, a girl's voice saying she couldn't get out. Slowly, against every instinct, I bent down and looked beneath the stall door. What I saw still invades my dreams. There are no feet, no legs at all, just darkness pooling on the floor, spreading outward unnaturally. And from within it, a pale hand pressed flat against the tiles, fingers bending backward as if testing their limits. The crying stopped instantly, replaced by wet, breathing inches from my face, and the lights went out. I ran blind into the hallway, slipping, hitting walls, hearing laughter follow me all the way back to my room. When I slammed the door shut, something hit it from the other side so hard the frame cracked, and through the wood, I heard Emily's voice whisper, calm and empty, "It gets easier after the third night." After that night, Evan stopped acting like Evan. He still spoke, still attended classes, still laughed at the right moments, but something behind his eyes was gone, replaced by a hollow stillness that made my skin crawl. He began waking up exactly at 2:17 a.m. every night, sitting upright in bed and staring at the door like he was listening to something only he could hear, whispering back under his breath in a language that didn't sound human. When I confronted him, he finally told me what happened when the thing on the fourth floor grabbed him. That it didn't hurt him, didn't threaten him, but showed him things, memories that weren't his. Students standing in a hallway at night, answering knocks, opening doors, following voices into bathrooms and stairwells, never screaming as they were slowly absorbed into the walls, floors, and ceilings of the hostel itself. He said Redwood Hills wasn't built on cursed land. It was built around something, sealed and fed over decades, growing stronger every winter when isolation and silence made people weak. That was why the rules existed. Not to protect students forever, but to delay the inevitable. Later that day, desperate for answers, I snuck into the administration office while the staff was distracted and found a locked filing cabinet labeled Incidents, PRE 1989. Inside were yellowed reports, death certificates, and photographs so disturbing I nearly vomited. Students frozen solid in bathroom stalls with no visible cause of death. Dorm rooms found empty except for deep impressions in mattresses like bodies had been pulled downward and repeated mentions of the fourth floor being awake. One report described a winter power outage where students were instructed to remain in their rooms after 2 a.m., and those who didn't were assimilated. The word was underlined, over and over again. That night, Evan told me he couldn't leave. Not because he was afraid, but because it wouldn't let him. At exactly 2:17 a.m., the hostel lights died all at once, plunging the building into darkness as emergency alarms wailed and doors throughout the hallway began unlocking themselves one by one, clicking open like an invitation. From every direction came footsteps, whispers, crying, laughter, all moving toward the stairwell. Evan stood up calmly, his movements stiff and unnatural, and said the fourth floor needed us, that it was cold and hungry. I tried to stop him, grabbed his arm, but the skin beneath my fingers felt wrong. Too cold, too tight, like something else was wearing him. The hallway stretched impossibly long as we were pulled forward, doors slamming shut behind us, walls breathing softly as if alive. When we reached the fourth floor, it was no longer empty. Dozens of figures lined the hallway, their faces half-formed, eyes sunken and glowing faintly, bodies fused into the walls and ceiling, whispering my name in perfect unison. At the far end stood the thing that had been feeding all along. Not a single creature, but a shifting mass of stolen shapes, memories and voices, pulsing slowly, waiting. Evan stepped toward it without hesitation, smiling faintly, and for the first time since this began, I realized the hostel didn't need to chase everyone. Sometimes, it simply convinced them to come willingly. I don't remember deciding to run. My body just did it on its own, jerking backward as Evan stepped forward and disappeared into the shifting mass at the end of the hallway, his smile stretching too wide before his face dissolved into the same half-formed expression surrounding us. The moment he was gone, the fourth floor screamed, not with sound, but with pressure, like the walls themselves were collapsing inward, the whispers turning into frantic chanting as the hallway began shrinking, doors bending and melting into the walls. I sprinted, slipping on the icy floor as hands pushed out from the plaster, fingers clawing at my ankles, my jacket, my hair, trying to pull me down and make me part of them. The stairwell door appeared at the last second, and I threw myself through it, just as the fourth floor sealed behind me with a thunderous slam that echoed through the entire building. I didn't stop running until I burst out into the snow-covered courtyard, barefoot and bleeding, collapsing as campus security lights flooded the area and staff shouted my name like they'd been searching for hours. They told me Evan had been missing for weeks, that I'd been found screaming alone in the courtyard at dawn, and that the fourth floor had never reopened after a structural inspection revealed nothing wrong. Classes resumed. Emily Carter's posters quietly disappeared. The hostel was declared safe, but the rules remained unspoken and unchanged. I transferred schools the following semester and never stepped inside another hostel again, but winter still brings Redwood Hills back to me in fragments. Flickering lights, the smell of bleach, footsteps pacing just outside my door. Some nights, at exactly 2:17 a.m., I wake up convinced I hear Evan whispering my name through the walls, his voice calm, familiar, telling me it's warmer inside now, telling me they're waiting. News articles still surface every few years about Redwood Hills. Students going missing, power failures blamed on old wiring, unexplained closures blamed on weather. But the building always reopens, always fills back up, always survives. Because Redwood Hills Hostel doesn't kill everyone. It only takes enough to stay awake. And every winter, when the snow buries the sidewalks and silence presses in too close, I know with absolute certainty that somewhere inside that building, the fourth floor is still breathing, still counting down to 2:17 a.m., still hungry, and still remember my name.